Welcome back to Monster in My Closet, the podcast where we shine a light on the professional world's darker corners. I'm Anil Saxena, joined by my co-host, the founder of Medusas, Morgan Hunter. Each episode, we tackle the fears and faux pas that haunt our work lives, with insights, interviews, and a dash of humor, some stupid analogies, and probably swearing. So if you've ever felt like you're navigating a workplace labyrinth, a never-ending approval process, an evil hall of mirrors, or a constantly ending quarter, you're in the right place. Let's confront those monsters together. Are you ready? Let's begin. Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Monster in My Closet. So Morgan, this week, are we scared or scary?
We're scared. Scared of being wrong.
Yes, which can be very scary to be wrong, especially when you don't think you're wrong. Or nobody's told you you're wrong in the past. That could also make things scary. So in this episode that we're calling The Labyrinth of Logical Fallacies, we're going to explore where twisted reasoning casts a dark shadow over workplace decision-making. From ad hominem to red herrings, we'll uncover how to identify and banish these invisible monsters and ensure your path is clear and fallacy-free, or as free as possible. So a few big things that we want to discuss today. So first, we want to begin to kind of explore this idea of logical fallacies in the workplace and how they impact data analysis and decision-making. Second, we want to look at some strategies to avoid these logical fallacies. We'll talk about some real-world examples of logical fallacies in business decisions, and then look at some tools and techniques for logical thinking or more logical thinking. Morgan, why is this a topic that we should be talking about? Why is this important?
So I think it's important because logical fallacies are so pervasive. And even if you try really, really hard to not have any logical fallacies in your thinking, it's just the path of least resistance. And as humans, we're going to take it. So even if you're like fully conscious of examining and do I have any logical fallacies, you're still going to be prone to do it. So it's one of those things I feel like you always have to be aware that could be happening and kind of check yourself.
Yeah. I mean, I think the truth is that all of us have logical fallacies, right? I mean, that's just part of being a human being. And there's so much research about this notion, and they kind of fall into this general human bias. Sorry, I'm using air quotes for those of you not watching. And it feels like traps that we fall into, myself included, when something works or it doesn't work, we add meaning to that instead of looking at data or empirical research around that. And one big one that comes to mind for me is remote work, right? Like there are all these logical fallacies about why being in the same office is better than not being in the same office or not being in an office at all. And if you look at because I need to be close to people, then everyone needs to be close to people. Or because we used to work this way, then we should continue to work this way because that's what I remember was good, or whatever the case may be. And there's tons of other examples about that, like around conferences being effective and all that kind of stuff that
I love to travel, so therefore you love to travel.
Right. I love dinner, and so I think everyone should love dinner, and we should have more team dinners, right?
Right.
Right. I had a boss at a place that I will try not to state, and this individual believed that when you had team dinners, it actually bonded the team more. But this individual was single and had no children and no real connections outside of work. The whole team had spouses and children. And so
Mhm.
we would go to these dinners and be miserable. We'd be looking at our watches like, is it okay for me to fucking leave this place so that I can go home and my wife will not kill me for another
Mhm.
team dinner? Um,
Right.
so, right, what are some of the,
I feel you on that.
yeah, the personal thing, like, and individual,
Say it out because we could just complain about extracurricular work activities the whole
yeah,
time.
yeah, it just, but it is one of those fallacies. Somehow, if I break bread with you, that means we'll like each other more. I used to hear this other thing about, like, you don't know somebody until you've gotten drunk with them. And it's like, well, that's not really true.
No.
Because if you get drunk with me, then you're just getting drunk with me. That's not the real me necessarily. And you might be cleaning up vomit, which that's not a good thing. I don't want that on my conscience or conscience. Conscience. I don't want to be conscious, whatever. So like, the
My
most,
it's like, hey, I'm not going to bond with you outside work. All it's going to do is reinforce how I already feel about you, right? So I'm either going to like you more or I'm going to hate you more, right? So that it
yeah,
could really go either way for me.
yeah, yeah. It exemplifies or exacerbates the thing that I'm already believing. So, what are some of the most common fallacies that we see in workplace data, or in how we operate as organizations?
Yeah. So there's there's so many logical fallacies, and I'm gonna promote the show notes again. We have over 50 logical fallacies that you can look at and start to be aware of. One of the ones that I see a lot is cherry picking, which is only presenting evidence that supports your argument
Mhm.
while ignoring contrary evidence, right? So an example of this would be, I've worked in software as a service for a very long time. There is this challenge of undeployed backlog. That means you've sold something, and it has not been deployed yet in the customer environment. And it was very interesting for years and years and years. They're like, this must be the problem of, the people that are implementing it. And I argued that that is not the case. The real case of why we have undeployed backlog is the way we bundle products and services and sell them. So Anil, if you need a ticketing solution and I sell you a ticketing solution plus, today for the low price of $99, you can also get these 5 other things, right? So it gets bundled together. You didn't really need those 5 other things. You're not mature enough right now to handle the 5 other things. You just needed a ticketing solution, but now you have the 5 things, right?
Yeah,
And then everyone's scratching their head like, why haven't you deployed that? It was because you never intended to deploy it. That's the meat of it right there. But no matter how much evidence there was to support that, everyone kept thinking it was the problem of the implementers, which I could just, no, you're never going to solve the problem. And they never did solve the
right.
problem.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good one. There's one, and maybe we can go back and forth a little bit.
Yeah, yeah.
Right? I think one of my favorites is anecdotal. Right, this notion of social proof. So, for those of you that live in a place where other people try to sell you things, we have a no solicitor sign on our door, but
Same.
motherfuckers will knock. They don't care. And they're like, hey, I'm not selling, but I wanted to tell you about this thing. And it's like, you are trying to sell me something. But they will tell me, well, I talked to Dave over there and blah, 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 and they're going to buy the thing.
Yes. Good for
There's,
Dave. Good for
right.
Dave.
Yeah.
F-
These are instances when I'm glad I don't have a gun because it'd just be like, that's how I'd answer the door. So social proof and anecdotal, right? That's that whole. It's one of the 7 rules of persuasion that was really made popular by Robert Cialdini, and everybody should read that book. It's a good book. Or if you don't like to read, you could watch him on YouTube. He's got tons and tons of videos. But this is that idea that if you worked in a particular situation, it should work again in a similar situation, even if it's not repeatable, right? So there's this. I love this analogy. When we were doing this research, I read this thing, like it causes this underlying issue of causation versus correlation. So right, like there's this belief that, or you could say, ice cream causes people to buy sunscreen. But the reality is that when people buy ice cream, sales of sunscreen does go up. And so if you're using anecdotal, this belief that eating ice cream causes people to buy sunscreen, but the reality is that it's usually warmer when you're buying ice cream out at a place. And so therefore tend to buy sunscreen, or some people do. I don't, because I'm brown. And so I think that there's this tendency to lump those things together, versus kind of pulling it apart and looking at what's the real cause of why things are going on. That's one of my favorites, personally. Um, what's another one that you kind of really you really like, Morgan?
There's one that's called genetic fallacy, which is judging something as either good or bad based on its origin. And I think that this happens a lot of times in the corporate environment. So, for instance, if you have a senior executive that generally has great ideas, but then has a really bad idea, and people go, well, it must be a good idea because all their other ideas are good, right? So, right? Like, no, but it's not. The other place where I see this, when corporations choose to hire outside their organization as opposed to hiring from within. So let's say Gary, because Gary is our guy. Gary is a people manager, and Gary has issues, and Gary needed to be let go, right? So instead of promoting anyone into Gary's position, they're saying, okay, now everything under Gary is bad or incompetent or has the same problem, so therefore we're going to hire from external. So I feel like corporations look at the people they have and they're like, I don't like the status quo, so therefore everyone who's currently part of that in any way is part of the problem, and so therefore I'm getting fresh people in, right? And I just feel like it's very, very detrimental to say things are inherently good because it was touched by a source or came from a source, or inherently bad.
Well, that one, it makes me think of, so when Jack Welch was the CEO of GE, things that emanated from GE, people were like, well, it's got to be good because it came from GE. Like it's the fruit of the great tree versus the fruit of the poison tree, right? Like, you know, everything that Gary was the planter of the poison tree, and everything that he touched turned to shit. And so no matter what, but boy, Jack Welch, he did something, and everybody that worked under Jack Welch was this great guy, or gal, mostly guys. But then when we actually learned about what happened at GE, it was a foundation of shit that he built upon, and really destroyed and undermined one of America's great companies. But that's a story for another day.
Yeah.
But it is
Yeah.
interesting, right? Like that's a that. So the other one that I really kind of love is, and it's weird to say that you love these logical fallacies, because you shouldn't, but they're interesting, right? So the one that I really like is this appeal to authority, and I feel like this is so prominent now in the world of work, right? Like this CEO is a billionaire, and so we should trust her claim this works or that works, or something about how society should work. And I think we the other thing that we see is because somebody is a VP or an SVP or a senior leader in an organization, that title carries, well, they must know something. And they're not a subject matter expert in that area, but because they have a title, it falls into that. And I almost wonder sometimes if best practices fall into this as well, right? Into that appeal for authority, or it could even be the genetic one that you were talking about before. Those are that appeal to authority. That to me, I bristle when I hear like, well, Warren Buffett said blah blah blah, and so that must be the truth. And it's like, yeah, he's a smart guy, but he even says that he's never the smartest person in the room. And so it bugs me when we always do this appeal to authority.
Interesting one that, and I didn't see it on our list, so I'm going to make up some fallacy here.
Yeah.
So let's say that you have a suite of senior executives, the CEO, CFO, whatever, and the CFO is doing something nefarious, right? And you're like, well, it must be okay because the CFO and the CEO, they have lunch together, so they must be fully apprised of what's going on and be okay with this.
Yeah.
Right. And there's been many times, and this is not a real situation, so nobody panic, but there's been times where I've like, there is no way person X is aware of this, because if person X was aware of this, someone would be in jail. Right. So
Right.
there's just the idea that because you are in the same orbit as another individual of authority, that person also agrees with the thing. So I see that quite a bit in business. And it's really interesting. So you got to be willing to go, let's check that. Let's actually ask this person whether or not they're okay with this. Like, have you talked to legal? Legal must be okay. But I don't think legal knows about this, because if they did, they would not be okay. So the other thing that I see quite a bit in business is argument from incredulous. I'm just going to say incredulousness, right? An argument coming from being incredulous, which is stating a claim must be false because it seems unbelievable or implausible. So I have personally run into this quite a bit because I love to just pound the shit out of data. Like I love data analysis. I love to get in and find stuff that is shocking and that I wasn't expecting. I love to be surprised. And so many times when I'm surprised by data, I want to share it with my friends. Hey, look at this thing. I saw this thing, and this is a totally unexpected result. And they're like, no, that's not true. I'm like, but it is true because here's the data. And we think your data is wrong. I'm like, not my data, your data, running your data. But it's fascinating. And then like years later, like, oh my God, this thing, it's crazy. Yeah. 2 years ago, you didn't believe this could happen. But even sometimes when the data is in front of people, if it's still wildly different than their worldview, they may even reject hard evidence that's put in front of them.
Yeah, that is so true. I think that happens so often, right? When you're accepting a new technology, or you're looking at a different way to solve a problem, or any of those kinds of things, that's a really interesting one. I think that people have a tendency to get locked in to, like, this is the way the world works in my estimation, and so therefore it doesn't matter what you show me in terms of proof. I believe what I believe, and your data is wrong. Or they kind of pick at the data, or pick at how you got to the conclusions that you came to. Yeah. I remember when I was at Gallup, and a Great Place to Work, that happened a lot. Like we would tell people, we would survey thousands, tens of thousands of people and present it to the CEO, and they would say, people don't believe that. And it's like, motherfucker, people believe that. They literally said it in the survey. And this is their words. I didn't make this up. I couldn't make this up. It is just so fascinating to me how people, and I do the same thing, right? How people get like, well, the data must be wrong, right? The data must be wrong. They must have. So I got blood tests last year, and it showed that I had higher sugar, right? And at the
Mm.
time, I was drinking a lot of wine, right?
Oh, yeah.
Like a lot, because wine is good. It is tasty, and it goes with everything, even hot dogs and curry. Cherie, my wife, who, if you've listened to this podcast, you know she is much smarter than I am. She was like, "It's the wine." Like,
It's not.
and she was like, "No, there is so much sugar in alcohol and in wine, and red wine in particular,
Yes.
that you should either A, drink much less, or stop drinking it." And I did my own research
No,
and
yeah.
found that she was I found that she was right, and I still didn't want to do it.
Yeah.
So,
It's a
right,
tasty.
there is that, like, that is tasty. It's delicious. But I stopped, right? Because it made more sense. And she kept talking to me about it.
So
But
what's the logical fallacy when you don't believe it when your spouse tells you, but if anyone else tells you it's true?
I don't know. Yeah, that's a good one. It's the
I have to look
spousal.
this up. I have to look this up because it has to be on our list of 50 some logical fallacies.
If it's
Going,
not, then we'll put it on there and we'll coin it,
yes.
right? We'll
Yeah.
we'll call it the spousal fallacy or something.
I love that. We just
Yeah,
made something.
yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
We added to the world. Yes.
So so I was thinking, how can so I was learning when I was reading all of these logical fallacies. I'm like, yes, I've done that. I've seen that. My brain is automatically like going out and trying to pull out real world examples of where this exists.
Mm.
And honestly, just kind of the awareness that these things exist started helping me think about whether or not I was personally using these logical fallacies. And so I was thinking, if we were going to give advice to people in the workplace on how to deal with this, I mean, obviously you can do training, like, oh, hey, this is don't have a logical fallacy, right? Most corporate training sucks. I'm just going to say that. It doesn't actually help with the behavior if there's a behavior modification problem that you're having. So I was thinking, and I hate team building. I just generally am a grumpy person when it comes to team building, but this seems like it'd be a fun group activity. So if you were to put like all of the logical fallacies in on a piece of paper on cards or whatever, and you had to pick one, and then you had to, as the person who picked the card, give a real world example of that type of fallacy. So what you're doing is training your brain to look at the fallacy and then associate it with a behavior that you have seen. So your brain is starting to make that connection. Then when you see it in the wild and in real life, or if you're doing it, you're going, wait a minute, I just did this logical fallacy. I should check myself, right? And have someone else look at this and make sure that it's solid. I
Yeah.
think this would be a good opportunity for a game at work.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I think that because we live in such a fast paced world, right, where action kind of equates to results sometimes, it's important to be wary and skeptical and thoughtful about kind of how decisions are made. And I think it's really important that as a leader, we admit when we do it, right? When there is a logical fallacy, that we admit that we see or we're doing, and correct it. And then I think the other thing is, like you're saying, like, ask people to kind of examine their actions and activities and make it okay in the team or in your organization to kind of point out that, hey, you're using this logical fallacy, and let's examine that again, because I think it's very easy to fall into, right? And I love that idea of kind of creating a game and really making it part of uh, our, our vocabulary, right, in the workplace.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Anything else that you feel like would be really good for people to start to do, to help root out some of these logical fallacies?
I think one of the things that I've done is when I build something that I think is wonderful and I'm feeling pretty full of myself, I go to people that I know are super smart and I say, break this.
Mm.
Try to break it. Because I want the thing to be truly wonderful, right? So unless it's been tested and proven that it doesn't fall apart logically, right? When you start to poke holes in it, then it isn't a great solution. So I do ask people to break stuff when I have concepts, ideas, data, whatever. I like to run it by people and say, what do you see that could be a problem here?
Yes. My computer agrees so much it dinged in affirmation. So,
Fairy.
right. Somebody got its wings or something. And I think the other thing that I love that idea, and I think the other thing is to ask people is like why this won't work. Like why will this concept or this idea or this notion like why won't this work or what could get in
Mhm.
the way of it being successful? And so it's that notion of really kind of making sure that you are focusing on that.
Mhm.
And as we've said in other episodes, there is a ton of stuff in the show notes that is rich and interesting. And we strongly suggest that you look at those show notes and formulate your own opinions and look at for which one of these logical fallacies is your favorite. I think I would love to hear if,
Yeah.
yeah, which ones you feel like are most rampant in your organization or that you fall into the most.
Mhm.
That would be cool. All right.
Yeah.
Yes, we would love your stories, or we would love your other people's stories. Like, tell us more about Gary,
Sure.
right? Because
Yeah.
Gary is the doppelganger for all things bad. And I feel like maybe we should clarify that it's not you, Gary. It's those Garys.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. In case Gary's listening. Some
Right. This is one of our 15 listeners. All right, everybody. Thank you so much for listening to another episode of Monster in My Closet. Please check out those show notes, and we will see you next week.
Bye.
As we wrap up another episode here at Monster in My Closet, we want to thank you, our fearless listeners, for joining us on this journey of exploring what scares us or when we're scary. Professionally, of course. Together, we've ventured deep into the workplace wilderness armed with humor, insights, and a touch of irreverence, and hopefully learned something together along the way. But our journey doesn't end here. Monster in My Closet is proud to be part of Medusas.org. Medusas is a membership-driven, non-profit organization serving underrepresented groups, minorities, and individuals with disabilities who are doing business in the software-as-a-service space. We're a community created by SaaS professionals, for SaaS professionals, and even the SaaS curious. Visit Medusas.org to discover how you can contribute to a movement that empowers professionals to face their workplace monsters head on. Don't forget to subscribe, share with your colleagues, and leave us a review. Your feedback helps us shine a light on the monsters lurking in the professional closet, making our community braver, stronger, and a little bit wiser. Until next time, keep challenging the status quo, embrace the journey, and remember, no monster is too big when we face it together. Cheers.